Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today in our series of talks promoted by the United States Spiritist Federation every Saturday morning, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. I am so happy to be here today in embracing the holiday spirit and with very special guests representing the main spiritist organization in the United States. And they will talk today about the women of the gospel. As we know, we have the great and unique role of Mary, Jesus' mother, and she's a supreme example of being a true believer. But as we want to highlight today, the gospel is full of other women who played important roles and that are praised by Jesus for their words, for their actions. These women have impacted lives, touched hearts, and have been examples to be followed. So, before we bring our guest today, I would like to take a moment to prepare ourselves by saying a brief initial prayer. So, if I may, if we take a moment to connect with God, connect with our spiritist mentors, our guardian angels, and all the spirits of light who are here today, may they be present during this next hour, hour and a half. May they inspire each of the panelists, as well as each one of us who are listening to this talk today. May we be touched by those words, and they may bring light to our hearts and our lives. So be it. I would like to take this time to introduce our guests. And I will start with Ligia Carvalho. Ligia represents the United States Spiritist Federation. She is the director of the FYCSE, the FIXE department, which stands for Family, Youth, and Children Spiritist Education Department for the United States Spiritist Federation. She's also a co-founder of the Spiritist Center Divine Light in New Jersey. Thank you, Ligia, for being here. Next is Livia UEHARA. Livia represents the U.S. Spiritist Medical Association. She is a board member of that organization, a nonprofit organization with the focus of bridging medicine and spirituality. Next, I would like to introduce Dan ASSISI. Dan is representing the California Spiritist Association. He is the founder member of the Spiritist Institute and of the California Spiritist Association. He is also the author of the book, Our Road to Damascus, and a host of the Spiritist Conversations podcast. Welcome, Dan. Next, we would like to bring YASCO ARACAVA, who is representing today the Spiritist Societies of Maryland. YASCO is a member of the Spiritist Society of Baltimore and a steady contributor to the other Spiritist centers that compose Spiritist Societies of Maryland. Thank you for being here, YASCO. Next, we would like to bring Peter Hayes. Peter represents the Tri-State Spiritist Federation. He is the president of the Spiritist group Love and Light in New Jersey. He's one of the executive director of the Tri-State Spiritist Federation and is also the outreach director of the United States Spiritist Federation. Thank you for being here, Peter. And last but not least, I would like to introduce Marcelo NETTO, who is here today representing the Spiritist Federation of Florida. He is the president of that organization, as well as the president of Liao Publisher and of FEB Publisher. In addition to all of it, Marcelo is the vice president of Conscious Living Spiritist Group. It is such an honor to have representatives of this Spiritist organization. We come together, represent the work that we continuously do with the dissemination of Spiritism in the English language in the US and, in fact, all over the world. Hi, everyone. So nice to have all of you with us today. Just a reminder to our friends who are here watching this live, please take a moment to write your comments or questions to be addressed to the speakers after the presentation. If there's not enough time to address all questions, since we have so many of us here today, we will give you or remind you to provide that to the United States Spiritist Federation at info@spiritist.us, so you can reach we can reach you with an answer later. And please let us know that we're here today to celebrate the women of the gospel. And we'll start today with Ligia Carvalho. Ligia will bring the studies on Livia Publio Lentulus' wife. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. And, before we get started, this is the book that was used 2,000 years ago to do my research. And I won't lie, when the topic of the women of the gospel came about, I looked for a self-serving purpose. Which women, can I look into? Where can I get some inspiration to help myself as a woman, myself to improve and learn? And I decided to learn more about Livia. I think in the past, a lot of the focus in this book is obviously on Jesus, but on her husband, Publio Lentulus, who we know to be Emmanuel. And I said, how about his wife? And if you look at the life of Livia, it's interesting. There's some, historical facts that is important for us to kind of briefly know, just to help us to have a better understanding of what are, her actions and her response to what was happening in the world at that time in relation to Jesus means. So Livia, she was a patrician, meaning she was a very wealthy, very established Roman woman, married to Publio Lentulus, who was a Roman senator. So they were politically connected. He was very powerful. And she had all the access of finances and comfort and also frivolities. The book comes to tell us that as a society, in that era, the acquisition of slaves and the endowment of responsibility to slaves, not only for the hard jobs, but also for a lot of the house-run responsibilities and child rearing and education, kind of left a space for women of her caste, so to speak, to have access to, frivolities and the luxuries, and to have an idle-minded lifestyle that turned into just pleasures of material things. But the book tells us that Livia, in spite of having access to all these things, her focus really wasn't on it. She was dedicated to her family and her life. And anybody that likes telenovelas or like the gossip stories, you can find a lot of it in here, because Livia had to face many, many challenges, including being falsely accused of infidelity, of having, relationships outside of the home. Her husband didn't trust her, and he basically exiled her in the home. Her daughter was sick, and almost dying. Her son at 1 year of age got abducted, and she never saw him again. And all these things that you can learn more in the book serve to develop and shape her personality. So what kind of woman facing such challenges? And I thought of myself, betrayal, accusation of unfaithfulness, losing a child who's sick. What kind of attitude, what kind of life view would I have? And I learned from Livia that in these challenges, yes, she was already predisposed to a good moral, ethical behavior. Um, but then through her slave Anna, she learned of this new prophet, Jesus. And Anna came to introduce her this new concept, because in that time they had multiple gods and they had to do all these different lifestyles. And there was a sense of, I'm better than you and we cannot commune. And slaves are not people in essence. There was such a discrepancy in recognition of people. And Jesus came to teach that we are all siblings, that we are all equals in the eye of God, and that we should all love each other. And she took to this philosophy and she believed in it. And once again, because she was a Roman and a patrician, it was below her ability to go and see Jesus was looked down upon. He was frowned. It would be an embarrassment to her population, to her class. And she just became curious about the teachings. And when she learned about his power of change, she looked for that power to help her with her daughter who was sick. And then she had her one encounter with Jesus. And I'm going to briefly read some quote because the time is running by, where she met Jesus. And he said to her that her moment to be with him, her moment to prove her faith will come when he said, "Rejoice in our Father, for my words and teachings have touched your heart forever. Go and believe, for the time will come when I shall accept your sacrifice and self-sacrifice." So upon learning of Jesus and having that brief encounter, her life changed forever. And she learned to internalize those concepts. And when she faced those challenges in her life, where her husband basically abandoned her, her 1-year-old son was lost forever, never to be found. Her daughter had been pushed away by her husband who believed in her betrayal and she was innocent. She turned to Jesus and she sought a life of platitude and prayer and goodness. And she dedicated herself to trying to learn his lessons of humbleness and forgiveness. She could have turned herself against her family. She could have turned herself against her class and society. But instead, she chose to implement the concepts of understanding and equality and love and understanding that life only poses an experience to teach us so that we can have a better afterlife, as if life is a moment of growth and learning. And yes, those are challenges that we have to face. There's sadness and sacrifices, but all those things have a purpose, which is to teach us to better ourselves so that we can have the real life in the afterlife. And there's a brief summary here, once again, that summarizes the faith that she came to teach us when it says, "Her faith was like a bright torch lining her pain-filled road, and from which radiated all the light of human trust in the divine providence, a trust that transforms the painful trials of earth into a forestate of the eternal joys of the infinite." And I think one of the biggest lessons of faith that she taught me, and that I hope for those that got curious about her life, is that faith is an internal sense of self-sacrifice and trust in life afterwards, where Jesus promises a sense of peace and the absence of all the suffering, where people truly develop morally and ethically and have those rejoices of being in his kingdom, and that the earth is not this kingdom. She taught that in spite of what other people think of you, or what the people say, or societal expectations, she decided to live by the laws of Jesus, and that made her into a better wife, a better mother, a better person. And she taught us humbleness. Just this week, I thought of her, and my husband did a small thing, and I became so upset, and I was so resentful for something silly over Christmas lights. And I thought to myself, her husband betrayed her. He ignored her for 25 years in solitude in their same home. And when her moment came to sacrifice herself in the arenas, because she was taking as one of the Christians and sacrificed in those games and eaten by the lions, not only was she revering God, she was praying on behalf of her husband, who she still loved dearly, and hoping that she could in some way continue to protect and be with him. And I thought, look at this woman, 25 years, misunderstood, judged, maltreated. And her faith and her belief in God made her be a good person and also a good wife and a good spirit. So if I can learn from, even if it's 5% of her sacrifice, without resentment, without anger, and with total giving of herself, it is something that she has taught us. And a quick information before we leave. When she was gathering with other Christians, and they were in the catacombs, because at this time, they were still trying to get Christians to sacrifice them with the lions. And they were collected, they were together learning from one of the apostles. They say there were 200 people there. And an interesting fact that I hadn't learned, the book tells us out of those 200 people, the majority of them were women. So although the apostles and a lot of the names and the story of Jesus are of men, women were a force, were a presence. They were also endeavors and carriers and messengers of the message of Jesus. And Livia did that for us. She did that for me. And I hope she can do that for you as well. I hope everyone has a wonderful Christmas. And I'm very pleased and proud to be here today with all of these people. Thank you so much for the listeners. And I hope you have a wonderful day as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ligia, for telling us about the inspiring life of Livia. We'd like now to bring a different Livia UEHARA, and Livia will speak to us about the Samaritan woman. And I want to say thank you. Thank you, Livia, for adding to this conversation with this very specific woman of the gospel. Thank you. You are on mute, Livia. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be here today, and inspired by Ligia in that thread, I bring another pearl to you, the Samaritan woman. Thank you, João. So at this moment, I would like to ask you to listen and to follow up. For the ones that are not familiarized with her story, I would like to follow with you just briefly because the time runs. But just to put everybody on the same page, what was that encounter between Jesus and the Samaritan woman? So follow with your heart, not only with your reasoning, because we have a lot of symbolic words here and images that we need to use more than our reasoning. So Jesus left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the land that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired by the journey, sat down by the well. It was about the 6th hour. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." The Samaritan woman said to him, "What? You are a Jew, and you ask me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink?" Jesus answered her, "If you only knew what God is offering and who it is that is saying to you for a drink, you would have been the one to ask, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is so deep. How could you get this living water? Are you a greater man than our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank for it himself with his sons and his cattle?" Jesus answered, "Whoever drinks this water will get thirst again. But anyone who drinks the water I shall give will never be thirsty again. The water I shall give will turn into spring inside him, welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me some of that water, so I may never get thirst and never have to come here again to draw water." The next slide, please. He told her, next slide, John, please. "Go, call your husband and come back." This is really important. Go, call your husband and come back. She said, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true." "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem. Woman, believe me, a time is coming when you worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews, but the hour will come, in fact, it is here already, and true worshippers, we worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. God is Spirit, and his worshippers must worship in the Spirit and in truth. The woman said, I know that Messiah called Christ is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. Then Jesus declared, I, the one speaking to you, I am he. Then, leaving her water jar, pay attention on that, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, come, see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? They came out of the town and made their way toward him. So here you can see the story of the Samaritan woman in John 4, the 4th chapter. That is the Bible most long story about a woman and contain the longest conversation Jesus is recorded having with anyone. Briefly, I would like to share with you the Jews and Samaritans, they shared a common heritage, but they were divided by centuries of hostility and deep prejudice. It was a norm, for example, for Jews in Jesus' day to avoid going through the Samaritan territory. Samaritans, they were considered foreigners. They differ radically regarding the relative sanctity of Jerusalem and the Mount of Gerizim, and they have different legal and scripture traditions. Who was that woman? Known by us, rather by her ethnic and religious identity than by her name. She engaged with Jesus in a genuine and extended conversation and raised a variety of religious and theological issues that were key matters of dispute between Jews and Samaritans. She was really curious. She was inquiring and pushing Jesus. That resonates a lot with me. I'm really curious in what I do. That touched my heart so deeply because I want to know the whys of everything, why you do this and that. Jesus, on the other hand, he broke taboos. He was speaking to a woman publicly. He was speaking to a Samaritan woman, being a Jew, with 5 previous husbands, which was something not acceptable at that time, and also one active adulterous partner in error. He started with a need, give me a drink, a simple request for a drink, but ends up offering further, something greater to satisfy her deepest need eternally. The living water, the infinite love of God that illuminates the soul, purifying their acts. She said she was in a superficial understand what Jesus was trying to tell her. You do not even have a bucket to get this living water. So she was in another level of understand, but Jesus, he was talking to her about the gift of God, to her spirit, but she was here with reference to the flesh, to call her soul for the deeper understanding. He said, call your husband. This is really, really symbolic. Pay attention. If we were talking about that nowadays, it would be a chauvinism. But at that time, that the woman was not important. And the apostles could not speak directly to the women. They needed to go to their husbands. So this is really important. Call your husband. It's like call your soul. Call something bigger than you to understand what I'm talking to you. Be present. Do not call your illicit partner. The soul's husband is the intelligent mind enlightened by the higher light of God. Jesus was why did Jesus see on her? Because she was a Samaritan. So Jesus saw, and she used to have 5 husbands. So what Jesus saw on her, you know, he was thirsting for the woman's face. He was speaking in a veiled way to the woman, offering the spiritual water, the water of life. And little by little, he was finding a way into her heart. It seems he saw something in her heart that defied whatever we could expect of seeing for her situation and marital his status. If you see all the explanations about her historically presented, the most of the time they present her as a shameless sinner, but Jesus saw a lot more than that. The Lord opened the discussion about her marital status, but he has never recorded as telling her to repent about that. She finally took Jesus as a prophet, because how he could know about her personal life, she didn't mention that. And at that time, he revealed himself as the Messiah of God. What is the meaning of the Samaritan woman? She was, or she had, and still have a symbolic function. She functions in this story as a spokesperson for the Samaritan people, a rejected people, to whom Jesus gave the opportunity to be embraced by the love of God. And more important, which resonates in me, she opened a new era of, she was someone that inaugurates the women to spread the gospel in a patriarchal era. So this is really important to us as women. Remember when I said, pay attention, she left her water jar. This is really important and symbolic. What is, because Jesus was speaking about a spiritual water, and she was thinking about the water in the well, inside of the well, more superficial. But at the end, when she understood exactly what Jesus was talking about, and that he was the Messiah, the meaning of release the jar is to release. I'll talk later a little bit about that. What is that jar? The meaning of that. And also, she not only left the jar, she came back to her people, the Samaritan people, the rejected people, and she was considered and became an evangelist. Many of the Samaritans from the town believed in Christ because of her testimony. Also, we have, which is not pretty much diffused, the information that we have from our brothers and sisters from the Orthodox Christian Church. Over the centuries, they have traditions handed orally. She was supposed to be baptized as with the name of 14. She is considered in the Easters as a saint. In Russia, she is called Svetlana, and 14 is her name as a saint in the Eastern region in the world. Her mission was not just to spread in Samaria. The oral stories are said to say that she also went to Africa, to Carthage, to spread the gospel of Jesus. So she was viewed as the chief figure in this missionary movement. So she was a pioneer as a woman. Jesus opened the opportunity to give voice to women in a moment that the women didn't have voice. He was a feminist. She was one of the women that he gave that opportunity to spread that. And as I mentioned to you, what was the meaning of to release the jar? The jar are the transitory pleasures of life, the material things. I'm not telling you that the material things are not important. That is not the message. The message is when we are only focused on that and we forget that we are eternal beings. We are souls, we are spirits, that we live forever. So we need to consider more and more to receive that spring water, that bubbling from the higher power of God. And Jesus is that way. And she showed her that opportunity to spread that bubbling spring water of the love of God. Thank you so much for the opportunity of speaking to you today.
Thank you. Thank you, Livia. I am so excited to be here. I have learned about Livia and now about the Samaritan woman. Are we ready to learn about more women in the gospel? I am. And I would like now to turn our conversation over to Dan ASSISI. Dan will speak about Martha, Mary, and us. Dan, can you get started?
I sure can. Thank you, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with you today, partaking in this incredible opportunity for us to celebrate these incredible souls, these women of the gospel who have given so much to us through the millennia, through her wonderful and uplifting stories. One of my favorites is the story of Martha and Mary, which you can see here in this picture, along with their brother Lazarus. And that's how I imagine the three of them, Lazarus, Martha, and Mary, embraced in this lovely group hug, right? Because the three of them were really keen and true followers of Jesus. But you might remember the story of Martha and Mary. And if you don't, you can find it in the Gospel of Luke. And it's just 5 little verses that are so powerful and have the staying power for us. If you remember the story, you will also recall that Jesus was passing through the town after talking to so many people, and he decided to go into Martha and Mary's house, as he often did, and there he talked to people. And if you also recall the other details of the story, you remember that Mary sat at his feet, listening the whole time, while Martha was worried with taking care not only of Jesus, but everybody that was following him, because as you remember, Jesus did not travel alone. So she was really busy catering for everybody that she had to open her doors to in that house. And at one point in time, she gets worried and she asks Jesus to tell Mary to please help her, because she feels overwhelmed, she feels busy, and she feels responsible for taking care of everybody in that place and time, while Mary is just there listening to Jesus. And you might remember Jesus' answer to when he looks at Mary and says, Mary, you worry about so many things. But Martha, you worry about so many things, but Mary has had the better part, because there's only one thing, few things are needed, but only really one is important. And so from that story, we are generally left with a very simple idea that, maybe Martha was a little ditzy or materialistic. Maybe she was just worrying about the different things that take care in a day-to-day. Once we look more carefully, we take a couple of quick lessons that we are going to do really quickly, because we have just a short period of time to dive into such a beautiful story. Well, the first takeaway I think that I keep with me is that there's more to Martha than we first think. The fact that Jesus chose their home and that their home was known as Martha and Mary's house is already an indication of how amazing they were, because they were women. As you might remember, we were even more chauvinistic back then than we are now. So to have the story call your house is already a symbol that they were really well loved. It was not Lazarus' house. It was not husband's house or father or mother's house. It was their house. So they were really regarded well. And so when we look at it, we begin to see that there's more to Martha. She's not just that ditzy person that's taking care of everything around her so that she only cares about material things. She's taking care of people in the way that she knows best. She's feeding them, she's welcoming, and she's putting her heart in making sure that all around people feel welcome and have an opportunity to be with Jesus. And so from there, we start to learn that sometimes we need to look at people differently and not judge them from the first piece. Of course, the second piece that we also see in the story is the idea that there are spiritual priorities. While she is worrying about the house and feeding everybody else, Mary is drinking from the wisdom of spirituality. And sometimes we wonder if perhaps that's also not our story when we worry more about our jobs, paying our mortgage, or perhaps getting that career advancement, that job promotion, or making more money instead of focusing more time on growing personally and spiritually. So in many different ways, the story of Martha and Mary is a reminder to everyday life that there's nothing wrong with taking care of things that are material in nature. We have to do that. We have to take care of our bodies, our minds, but perhaps you'll be best suited to us to take care of our spirits, to seek growth emotionally and spiritually first, because now we know that we are immortal spirits and the things of the physical realm are going to go away, but that who we are will continue with us. So Martha's story really is about spiritual priorities in my eyes. What is it that we choose to do? And what I find really interesting about this story too, and this is the third piece that I will mention, and the last one, is that we talk about Martha and Mary. But if you think about it, Mary does not say one single word in the story. It's all about Martha. It is about what Martha thinks should be done and about what Martha thinks Mary should be doing. And in many different ways, I think that sometimes that's also our story, isn't it? We make our story about other people. We complain that other people are not doing things. We want people to do things that we want them to do in the ways that we want them to do. But the important thing here, which we are reminded by that beautiful penetrating eye and wisdom of the Christ, is that it's not about other people. It's about our choices and what choices we are going to make. And what choices are we making today? Are we comparing ourselves to others? Because that does not really change our lives. What changes our lives is our decision to move ahead, to make better spiritual choices. So, in many different ways, the story of Martha and Mary that we find in the Gospel of Luke, it's really a wake-up call from incredible women in the past that have reminded us about the choices we have today to do in our everyday life. And for those of us who are beginning to awaken to spirituality in general, it is a powerful call for us to measure in our hearts and in our minds what is the proper attention that we need to give to the things of the Spirit. Mary was sitting at Jesus' feet, symbolically speaking, learning. Martha was worried about the things of the material world. And we, in a way, have to be both Martha and Mary. We have to take care of our needs and our desires in the physical world as well, but we have to also not forget that we are immortal beings. And as such, we have to have a perspective of growth, of enlightenment, of love, and of course, of charity towards others from a spiritual perspective. So today, we celebrate Martha and Mary, and we hopefully bring a little bit of them to our hearts to remind us that we can be both and that we have to give proper due to the things of the Spirit.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. What a lesson from that short story found in the Gospel of Luke, especially as we get so close to Christmas, right? We need to understand that we need to be both. So thank you. And now it is my great honor to introduce YASCO ARACAVA. And YASCO will talk about Mary of Nazareth. What a special woman. Thank you so much, YASCO.
Hello, good afternoon. Hello, dear friends. Thank you very much for the U.S. Spirit Federation for this invitation. It's such an honor to be among the distinguished friends, listeners, followers, to talk about the women of the gospel and the iconic figure of Mary of Nazareth. Her importance, of course, lies first of she being the enlightened spirit chosen to be the mother of Jesus on earth, but also because she is universally accepted as the mother of all of us, independent sometimes of faith, religion, culture. She's a common figure to look for in moments of need. Nevertheless, although her importance in the 4 canonic Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we find very few accounts about her. We're going to talk about. Some also are in those we call non-canonic or apocryphal Gospels, and in the Spirit literature. So, the Luke's Gospel is the one that has most of the information about Mary. Why so? In the book that Ligia presented, Paul and Stephen, dictated by Emmanuel Toshiko Xavier, we learned that Paul, during his many missionary journeys, he started to gather information going through the place where Jesus was ministering, and also going many times to Ephesus to visit directly Mary of Nazareth. So in the end, when he felt he could not write his own gospel, he gave all the information to Luke and said to him, look, but you have to go to Ephesus and visit Mary and gather direct from her information. That's why his gospel is very rich about the early ages of Jesus, his nativity, etc. Another important source of information is the book Boa Nova, Good News, from dictated by Humberto de Campos to Chico Xavier. In the last chapter, called Mary, you will find that at the cross, in that extreme suffering, she starts to revisit all her life with Jesus since the birth, childhood, all the interesting events that happened at the temple, around the house, at the carpentry, etc. So we're going to, because of the time, just highlight some passage accounts that may be interesting to say about Mary. There's a lot more. First of all, the coming of Mary as well as Jesus was foresaw by the apostle, many apostles, but especially by the prophets or prophet Isaiah, some 700 years before the birth of Christ, and was confirmed by Matthew in his gospel. It said that Mary became orphan of both parents, a very young teenage, 15, I don't know. But the temple, she was welcomed at the temple because she had some relatives of her father there. So as an orphan, they welcomed her. But soon she had to leave that place. And Joseph, somewhat, was a widower, much older than her, perhaps already married with children, to be her husband or mostly her protector, tutor. So another item, the announcement, the nativity of Jesus is so well known among Christians that Joseph and Mary at her advanced pregnancy had to travel from Nazareth down to Bethlehem in Judea, kind of 90 miles far distant, on a donkey, imagine, to fulfill the Roman Empire demand for the census. But of course, with that rush journey, the birth became earlier, and we know Jesus was born in a stable before they could reach this relative's house that they intend to in the beginning. About the education, of course, Mary, she's not ordinary, but at the moment in the planet Earth, she wanted her son, that was so bright, so different, to have the best education with the priest in the temple. But Jesus said, no. I insist to get all the information, all my connection with God from my Father, working with my Father at the carpentry. That's what he was known later as the carpenter of the Nazareth. He was mocked sometimes by the high priest of this lower class that they decided he was. About some instance in the gospel, the Canaan, wedding at Cana is one of the few events placing together mother and son. That was when the first public miracle happened, when Jesus transformed the water in a good wine. Then you don't hear much about Mary, but we will hear at the last Passover feast that she was present there, because she was present during the imprisonment of Jesus, and of course at the cross in the company, again, mostly women, sorry, because all the disciples disappeared except for John, the youngest one. So we can deduce that Mary was more present in the life of Jesus and in the life of the disciples, much more than officially is accounted. And then we learned that during those different instances of resurrection, she was not clearly said that she was present, but she accepted the truth of Jesus' apparition, materialization to the different people. But she was this strong person holding together the disciples, the followers, consoling them after this state of disbelief, shock, loss of hope after this unexpected way Jesus went away from their lives. Later, John came to take back to Ephesus Mary to fulfill the advice Jesus made at the cross, saying both two are together as mother and son. And of course, in there she lived a couple of good years while John was spreading the news and holding the community there. Mary starts to receive an ever-growing line of people, part because they want to know direct from the mother of the master the life, the message from the Messiah. And also because of her kindness for spiritual height, she started to be the consoling voice, the healing voice for those suffering, for the lepers, the sick, all the ones in need. So the line started to grow, and that house became known later, the home of the Santissima, the home of the Most Holy. And one day, when she was very already old, Jesus appeared in that home in the clothing of a beggar, but with a kind voice about the Beatitudes, all these things. She said, it's interesting, this voice I can recognize. And then when he showed the wounds in his hands and the feet, she almost collapsed. And then he said, yes, mother, that's me. That's me. I came here to take you, for my Father wants you to be the queen of the angels in my kingdom. And soon after, of course, she died. And in the Spirit's literature, they show that after her discarnation, she was taken to visit all the places around the Lake Gennesaret and also to Roman prison. And there she consoled all the Christians that were there to be sacrificed. And she asked the young girl to sing. And soon the whole line of the people going to the arena was singing and being really elevated, consoled. And of course, we learn her mission didn't stop there. She is the head of the hospital, Maria de Nazaré and Mansão Esperança, that Ivone do Amaral Pereira describes in her book, Memoirs of Suicide. to rescue, to try to protect the suicidal and the suffering spirits. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks, Yasko. It is so good to hear about Mary she's portrayed in different stories. And as you mentioned, she is universally accepted, independent of culture, as our mother. So thank you. Thank you for reminding us about the beauty and the impact of Mary in our lives. Now, as we continue with our program, I would like to invite Peter Hayes. He will be here to speak about the widow from the widow's mite. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. The widow's mite. Jesus and the apostles were at the Second Temple in Jerusalem near the offering box. And Jesus is watching many people put in large sums of money into the offering box to support the Second Temple. And then he notices a widow who walks up to the offering box and puts in 2 mites. A mite was a Jewish coin, not a Roman coin, because the Second Temple only accepted Jewish currency, which is why they had the money changers. And Jesus is captivated by watching this woman make this contribution. A mite was worth, 2 mites were worth about a penny. And Jesus says to the apostles, "Truly I say, this woman has put in more than all of the others, because they gave out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, gave all that she had, all that she could live in." So what does this moment signify? In the Gospel according to Spiritism, chapter 8, the title is, "Do Not Let Your Left Hand Know What Your Right Hand is Doing." And in that chapter, it talks about the widow's mite, and it emphasizes that when we give in the act of charity without really thinking of ourselves, that has more merit in the eyes of God. When we give, it should be free of any personal agendas. Jesus is looking at the others who are putting in large sums of money, probably money most of them barely noticed. And you have to wonder what some of their intentions were. Were they showing off? Were they saying to everybody, "Look at me, I'm such a saint"? Were they perhaps wanting to be seen by the authorities at the Second Temple and so forth? But the woman, she just simply gave all that she had. And who was this woman? Was she a young widow, perhaps with children, or was she an elderly widow? We don't know. It doesn't say. Images that you see of this moment suggest both ways. Probably she was an elderly woman. And did anybody else besides Jesus notice her? Probably not. But Jesus could see her intentions. And one could ask, what else did this moment signify? Perhaps her gesture in the grand scheme of things was a call for unity. The widow's mite is mentioned in 2 times in the New Testament. It's mentioned in Mark chapter 12, verse 41, and Luke chapter 21, verses 1 through 4. And what's interesting is that in both versions, the sequence before, during, and after the widow's mite is the same. Just before the moment of the widow's mite, Jesus is criticizing the Second Temple, in a sense, by criticizing the scribes, those who go around wearing long robes, who always sit in the best seats of the synagogue, who recite excessively long prayers, and, he emphasizes, they drain widows of their houses. So he's criticizing them and saying they're kind of bilking or taking advantage of those who have the least. Although some widows could inherit property back then, so if they were wealthy, their husbands were wealthy, they too would be okay. But even so, Jesus is pointing out that the Second Temple is a place that has some problems with the way it's run. Now, right after the widow's mite, Jesus and the apostles are leaving the second temple, and one of them is really admiring how beautiful this place was. It was an enormous place, beautiful white stones, and so forth. And Jesus says, look at these buildings. There will not be one stone that won't be knocked down. So Jesus was foretelling a future event. Less than 40 years or so after the crucifixion, the Jewish revolt against Rome began in 66 AD, and it ended in 70 AD when the Romans completely destroyed the Second Temple. They burned it to the ground and they dismantled it. This is a huge and seminal moment in Jewish history. The Second Temple was a really wealthy place. Of the four major sects in Judaism, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, and the Zealots, it was the Sadducees who ran the Second Temple. They were the elite. The Second Temple was built by King Herod. It was, in some ways, a bit of a propaganda piece. But nevertheless, there were those who criticized the Second Temple because although it was in Mecca, although it was a place that was a very important institution in Judaism, although people traveled all over to go to the Second Temple, Jesus, for instance, pointed out that the Second Temple in some ways was an obstacle to holiness. And so here's this widow giving 2 mites. Imagine this. It's like giving a penny to support an institution that is a multi-million-dollar institution. But maybe what she's suggesting in this moment is none of the political, social, religious implications of the temple, whether one's for it or against it, it doesn't matter. Her personal situation didn't matter. After all, was this woman going to starve that night or go hungry because she gave all that she could? We don't know. We don't know her intentions. What was her marriage like? Who was her husband? How did he pass? We don't know any of this. But in a way, it doesn't matter because she was a woman who was simply in the moment. And she wasn't casting judgment on the Second Temple itself. She was making a gesture that could be interpreted as a call for unity. Judaism, after all, is primarily a tribe. It is united by its spiritual beliefs, cultural beliefs, but certainly spiritual beliefs. And so maybe that was part of her intention. And Jesus was struck by this. She was not worried about herself, and she was not worried about the Second Temple because both were ultimately in the hands of God. Thank you, and have a splendid holiday.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. And it's good to understand the story of the widow's mite as it relates to the story of Judaism and of the time. So thank you for enlightening us of that. And oh my goodness, we're approaching the end of this talk about the women of the gospel, and we couldn't finish about talking about the women of the gospel without talking about Mary of Magdalene. So I would like to have Marcelo Netto here to enlighten us about such an important figure of the gospel. Thank you, Marcelo.
Thank you very much, Marcia. Thank you very much for all our friends that are joining us this morning. It is a great honor. It is a great pleasure to be here talking about these wonderful women. And it is a quite honor about speaking about this amazing woman, Mary of Magdalene. As many of us know, and as contained in the Gospels of Mark and Luke, Jesus drove 7 demons from her, the evil spirits that we study so much in Spiritism, the obsession problems and everything. We can relate this event with what we study in Spiritism. As we also may recall, this is the moment of the encounter between Jesus and that young woman who longed for inner peace. She secretly craved for a different kind of love without ever finding it until she met the sweet Rabboni, Jesus knew of her courage, her boldness, her sincere desire. And after that encounter, she was never the same. Never the same. She was another woman, entirely renewed. We all know that. Luke presents Mary as a constant companion of Jesus during his ministry in Galilee and one of his earliest followers. She's also mentioned by name, at least 12 times in all 4 Gospels. And in all 4 Gospels, place her at the cross. That woman with a very sensitive heart who witnesses it all and stayed while many others saw. With an exception of John, they all run away, except for John, Mary of Magdalene, and Mary, mother of Jesus. So, in also all 4 Gospels place her as the premier witness to the resurrection. We recall that beautiful lesson of immortality when in the midst of tears, she hears the voice of Jesus. Woman, why are you weeping? Who are you seeking? This is Jesus talking to her in that specific moment. And she was, oh my God, that voice. She could not finish her thought. And she hears again, Mary. And she replied, Rabboni, Rabboni. She was completely stunned. The Master was alive and right there, radiant like the sun. Go to my brothers, replied Jesus. Go to my brothers and tell them. She stood up immediately, smiling and without any hesitation. She took the road to the city. And as soon as she walked in, she announced to all the apostles, very happily, I saw him. I saw the rabbi. The master has come back to those who love him. But no one believed her. No one, except for Mary, mother of Jesus. She was the only one that believed her. When we read about her exceptional life, we learn quite a bit. She has been given the title, the Apostle to the Apostles. As a matter of fact, St. Augustine, while he was incarnated, the benevolent spirit that we know from the codification, that we love so much, whenever speaking about her, would also assign her that same title, the Apostle to the Apostles. Yes, she did at the gates of the city of Ephesus, ascending to life in the arms. She died at the gate, She died at the gates of the city of Ephesus, ascending to life in the arms of Jesus, but not before leaving us with another beautiful and very significant example of love. Later, after her vision of the resurrected Christ, the resurrection of Christ, Mary returned to Galilee from Jerusalem, following the steps of their companions, their dear companions. And after some times, when Jesus' apostles and followers sought to relieve their past on the shores of Lake Tiberias, I don't know exactly how to pronounce, and you guys can help me out later on. The closest of the Lord's disciples left that region to labor for the good news. When the last 2 of them planned on finally leaving for Jerusalem, Mary, fearing the loneliness, the feeling of nostalgia, she begged them to allow her to go with them. But they both denied. They were fearing because of her past, because of the sinners, the sins that she committed. You know the difference between like men and women back in time, back in those days was a huge abyss. But Mary understood. She understood completely. She remembered the Master, and she resigned herself. There is in chapter 20 of the book, Good News, one portion that I would like to read because I don't want to lose track of the sequence of my thought. And I extract here a page and allow me to read. I made a few modifications so we can maybe follow along. And in this portion, it says, humble and alone, one day she heard of a group of lepers who had arrived. Feeling tired and sad, they asked for Jesus, but every door was closed to them. Mary went to see them. Feeling all alone herself, she decided to gather them under the trees by the shore and started filling their hearts with the light of the gospel. However, the local authorities ordered the immediate expulsion of the lepers. Mary decided to go with them. The whole group had to spend the night out in the open, but they felt overcome with the joys of the kingdom of God. They were all interested in Mary's descriptions and eagerly absorbed her encouragements, excited by her joy and faith. When they arrived at the city, they were directed to the distant valley of lepers, where Mary entered freely as if she herself was one of them. Her spirit recalled the lessons of the Master and was filled with the courage to do so. From then on, every afternoon, she assembled the group of new friends and spoke to them about Jesus' teachings. She would explain that until his death, Jesus had exemplified the good, teaching that all his followers should take heart to overcome the world. The lepers dragged themselves to be near her and to kiss her simple tunic, her simple clothes. She took them into her fraternal and loving arms as a mother would. It wasn't long before she started showing signs of leprosy herself. She understood this new situation and remembered Jesus' lesson that only those who know how to make sacrifices know how to live. She felt great pleasure for having brought a small glimmer of hope to her companions in suffering. As Mary sensed that her struggles were coming to an end, she wished to visit old friends for her personal circle in Ephesus. John the Evangelist, Mary of Nazareth, they both were there, and she longed to see them one last time. And at her farewell, her companions begged her for some final words of advice, words of recollections, enveloping them with such a great love. Our dear Mary only said, Jesus intensely wishes that we love one another, that we participate in his divine hopes, and that we persevere in the most extreme loyalty to God. Mary of Magdalene, the woman whose experience and complete love for the Master are living lessons that have crossed the centuries, and these lessons will never be forgotten. And this is a little portion of what I have to share with you guys, feeling once again extremely honored to be part of this beautiful group of brothers and sisters. Thank you very much, Marcia.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marcelo. I am touched. I'm touched by the stories and the narratives here about all of these women that we highlighted, the women of the gospel, and of course by the discussion that you brought to us about Mary Magdalene. I'm deeply, deeply touched. So thank you, Marcelo. Thank you, everyone who spoke here today. And I believe we have about 5 minutes, and so let's see if we have any questions or comments that we can share with you in the audience. And we do. Freddie Ricardo. Hi, Freddie. He has a question, and I think this is going to go to Marcelo. Marcelo, where did some historians think that Mary Magdalene had a marital relationship with Jesus?
I can have like a very short answer and a more elaborate answer. The short answer is confusion. But for trying to answer this question, the Bible gave no hint that Mary of Magdalene had a man and woman type of love relationship with Jesus. But what is important is that Jesus had both male and female disciples in his ministry, which has not very common on that time. So what the Gospels tells us is that Mary went to Jesus' tomb to prepare his body for burial. Yeah? So historically, no woman, this is historically, no woman would touch the naked body of a dead rabbi unless she was family. Jesus was beat and crucified. We all know this. So no woman would wash the blood and sweat off him unless she was his wife. Wait. Perhaps this is where the controversy comes from. What we often fail to understand is that Mary had a very special connection to the Master, the greatest transformation we know of, perhaps even greater than Paul of Tarsus. So that kind of love with capital L's, capital letters, is something perhaps we are still waiting to understand. And we try sometimes to adapt our feelings, our circumstances, the way that we think, to the dignifying moment of the initial times when those Christians following the Master understood something completely different. This is, of course, historians, they have to bring like possibilities, but we don't find, even in the whole codification, in all the works of Chico Xavier, Divaldo Pereira Franco, and many other mediums, nothing mentioned about this relationship. So this is what I have to bring you. So it's a confusion. The mission of the Master was way above this. I'm not disconsidering marriage relationship. Of course, this is not what we intend to say. It just is, it's a different mission, and we do not understand even now.
I say sometimes infamy is what draws people to understand more. So maybe that controversy and confusion is for all of us to study and learn about Mary Magdalene. So thank you, Marcelo. Let's see if we have another questions. And Glaucio, hi Glaucio. He has a question. How does the story of the widow's mite, so Peter, be prepared to answer, help us deal with our moments of frustration when we believe that what we do is never good enough?
Okay. Thank you for that question, Glaucio. Yes, obviously money can be very useful and very appreciated, but what if one doesn't have much money or hardly any? Labor, our labor is very important as a donation. Our time is important as a form of donation. Think about it this way. Jesus, for instance, said, actually it wasn't Jesus, but there's a parable that if you give a hungry person a fish, they will go hungry. But if you teach that person how to fish, they will never go hungry. So when we, for instance, donate our labor or our time, we may be instilling in someone else, or perhaps helping them in some way, that they're more likely to remember in the long run. Again, money's appreciated, but money comes and goes. But people are more likely to remember gestures. And the widow, in giving 2 mites, Jesus noticed the intentions of her and the gesture. Okay.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you so much. Let me see. I don't know if we have any more questions. And if not, I would like to say thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone who was able to join us live. And for those who
Thank
have been
you.
in our weekly Spiritist Talks. And before our final prayer, I would like to remind everyone next Saturday, December 18th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, as usual, Paulo Bispo and Rafael Rezendi will be here with us talking about the role of the spiritual body in disease and health. So I hope to see you next week. And if you have not done so, please take a moment to subscribe to the USSF YouTube channel to get the weekly reminders on the talks. And I would like to humbly ask Livia for closing our moment together here with a final prayer.
Dear Jesus, we are so grateful for that important moment when we were together to bring the importance of ordinary people that taught us a lot of important things to change our lives. Thank you so much for opening the door for women, for giving voice to us, to speak about our heart, our soul, to have a space in the society. And today, we congratulate all women that could help us and bring us a lesson to be better people, to help the way we live. Thank you so much, dear Lord. So be it.
So be it. Thanks, everyone.